A sheriff stepped into a cave during the coldest week anyone could remember, and the thermometer on the wall made him check it 3 times. Snow hammered the mountainside as the cave door swung shut behind him. Meltwater dripped somewhere in the darkness. A German shepherd lay stretched beside a stone stove, barely lifting his head. The sheriff pulled off one glove, stared at the thermometer, then glanced back toward the blizzard outside. Something about this place didn't make sense, and the veteran who built it wasn't explaining much. What do you think the sheriff saw that day? The bank took Jack Mercer's house on a gray Thursday morning in late October. There was no dramatic argument. No shouting, no final plea on the front porch. By the time the sun climbed above the Cumberland ridges, a deputy had already taped the notice to the front door, and the moving truck hired by the bank was parked beside the gravel driveway. Jack stood at the edge of the yard with his hands buried in the pockets of an old canvas jacket. The wind carried the smell of damp leaves and wood smoke. For a long moment, he simply stared at the house. 30 years earlier, he had built the front porch himself. The railing still leaned slightly to the left because he had rushed to finish it before his daughter Emily's 8th birthday party. He remembered that. He remembered the yellow balloons. He remembered his wife Sarah laughing. Funny what stayed in a man's head. Funny what didn't. A bank representative stepped onto the porch carrying a clipboard. "Mr. Mercer?" Jack nodded. The man offered a polite smile that never reached his eyes. "We just need your signature here." Jack took the pen, signed, handed it back. That was it. 30 years reduced to a single line of ink. The representative thanked him. Jack turned away before the man could say anything else. Diesel was waiting beside the truck. The German shepherd sat perfectly still, amber eyes fixed on him. 8 years old, gray beginning to creep around the muzzle, scar across the left shoulder. A veteran just like him. Jack opened the passenger door. "Come on, partner." Diesel climbed in without hesitation. The dog never looked back at the house. Jack wished he could do the same. The old pickup coughed twice before starting. Then they pulled onto the road. No destination, no schedule, no plan, beyond staying ahead of winter. The mountains rolled past beneath low clouds. Red and gold leaves covered the slopes. Beautiful, cold, temporary. By late afternoon, Jack turned off the highway and followed a narrow county road deeper into the hills. The land grew wilder, fewer houses, fewer fences, more forest. Eventually, he reached the only thing he still owned. 27 acres, inherited from his uncle Raymond. Rocky land, steep land, land nobody wanted. His uncle used to joke that the property was only useful if somebody wanted to raise goats or hide from the government. Jack hadn't visited in nearly 10 years. The dirt track was almost gone now. Tall grass scraped against the truck doors as he drove. The small clearing at the top of the ridge looked even lonelier than he remembered. No cabin, no barn, nothing but trees and stone. The truck rolled to a stop. Silence settled over the mountain. Jack shut off the engine. For a while he just sat there, listening. A habit from Iraq. Listen first, move second. The mountains had their own language. Wind through pine needles, branches rubbing together, a distant crow. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous, at least not yet. As darkness approached, he arranged a blanket across the truck seat. It wasn't comfortable. Didn't matter. He'd slept in worse places. Diesel circled twice before lying down. Jack opened an old metal thermos and drank cold coffee. The sky faded from gray to black. One star appeared, then another, then hundreds. The mountain air grew sharp. A few hours later, he finally drifted asleep. The sound hit him like an explosion, a metal slam somewhere in the darkness. Jack's eyes snapped open. His body moved before his mind did. He was halfway upright, heart pounding, hand reaching toward a weapon that wasn't there. For one terrifying second, he wasn't in Kentucky. He was back in Iraq. Dust, heat, radio chatter, incoming contact. His pulse hammered against his ribs. Then reality returned. Slowly, painfully. The darkness inside the truck, the cold windshield, the smell of pine. Not Baghdad, not Fallujah, not Ramadi. Kentucky, just Kentucky. Jack exhaled. Across the clearing, a loose gate on an abandoned logging trailer banged against metal in the wind. That was all. Nothing more. His hand trembled slightly. Diesel lifted his head. Without making a sound, the dog pushed his muzzle against Jack's knee. Steady, present, real. Jack rested one hand on the shepherd's neck. The thick fur felt warm. Solid. Yeah, he whispered. I'm good. The dog remained there until Jack's breathing slowed. Only then did Diesel lie back down. Morning arrived, cold and clear. Frost coated the grass. Jack climbed out of the truck and stretched his aching back. Diesel was already awake. The dog stood near the tree line, staring toward the western ridge. Not barking, not moving, watching. Jack followed his gaze. At first he saw nothing. Then he noticed a dark opening halfway up the rocky hillside. A shadow where no shadow should be. A narrow gap hidden between limestone outcroppings. He frowned. He didn't remember that being there. Diesel started walking toward it. Slowly, purposefully, like he had found something important. Jack grabbed his jacket. All right, partner. The German shepherd never looked back. Together they started toward the ridge. Neither of them knew it yet. But that forgotten opening in the mountainside was about to change everything. The climb took nearly 20 minutes. The hillside was steeper than it looked from below. Loose limestone shifted under Jack's boots. Fallen leaves hid shallow holes and broken roots. More than once, Diesel stopped and glanced back as if checking whether his partner was still following. The cave sat halfway up the ridge beneath an overhang of gray stone. From a distance, it looked small. Up close, it felt different, older. The opening was barely 8 feet wide, shadowed by mountain laurel and scrub pine. Cold air drifted from inside, but it wasn't the sharp bite Jack expected. The temperature felt steady, almost calm. Diesel walked straight to the entrance, then stopped. The dog stood perfectly still, ears forward, tail low. Watching, not afraid, not excited, just alert. Jack noticed it immediately. Working dogs didn't waste energy, neither did soldiers. He crouched beside Diesel and studied the opening. No fresh bear tracks, no obvious signs of recent animal activity, no smell of decay, no scattered bones, nothing that suggested danger. Still, old habits stayed alive. Jack picked up a fallen branch and tossed it into the darkness. The sound echoed. 1 bounce, 2, then silence. No movement, no reaction. Clear enough. For a look, Diesel stepped forward first. Jack followed. The cave widened after the entrance. A narrow passage opened into a surprisingly large chamber. Morning sunlight reached only a few feet inside before surrendering to shadow. Jack removed a flashlight from his jacket pocket. The beam swept across stone walls. Dry limestone. No standing water. No signs of flooding. No heavy condensation. That caught his attention immediately. Most caves in the region carried moisture. This one didn't. At least not much. He moved deeper. 20 feet. 30. 40. The floor remained solid and dry beneath his boots. Then he stopped. Something wasn't right. Or maybe it was exactly right. Jack knelt and placed one hand against the stone wall. Cold, but not freezing. Outside, frost still covered the ridge. Inside, the temperature barely seemed to change. His eyes narrowed. He checked another wall, then another. Same result. Interesting. Very interesting. Diesel wandered toward the rear of the chamber. Instead of sniffing randomly, he followed the perimeter. Methodical. Almost like he was conducting his own inspection. Jack smiled faintly. Doing your own recon, huh? The dog ignored him. A few minutes later, Jack stepped back outside and sat on a large boulder near the entrance. He watched the trees sway below. The valley stretched for miles. The wind was stronger here, yet almost none of it reached the chamber. The ridge itself blocked most of the northern gusts. Natural protection. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket. The same waterproof notebook he used years ago overseas. Old habits. He wrote a few simple observations. Southeast-facing entrance. Dry interior. Stable temperature. Minimal wind penetration. Potential water source nearby. He stared at the words. For the first time in months, maybe years, his mind wasn't focused on what he had lost. It was focused on a problem. A mission. Something that could be improved. Something that could work. The sound of an approaching engine broke the moment. Jack looked down toward the dirt road. A pickup truck climbed the ridge. Red. Mud-covered. Familiar. Travis Boone, the owner of the local lumberyard. The truck stopped near Jack's. A minute later, Travis appeared on the trail. He was carrying a coffee cup and wearing the expression of a man who already thought he knew the punchline. Well, I'll be damned. Jack didn't answer. Travis looked past him toward the cave, then laughed. Actually laughed. You serious? Jack remained seated. What part? The cave. Travis pointed. Tell me you aren't planning to live in that thing. Jack glanced toward the dark opening. Haven't decided. That's a lie. Travis smirked. You got that look. What look? The look people get right before they do something stupid. The wind rattled through the pines. Diesel emerged from the cave and sat beside Jack, watching, listening. Travis shook his head. Man, winter's 6 weeks away. Jack said nothing. You know what that place is? Travis continued. It's a grave waiting for a body. Still nothing. Travis chuckled. Self-built tomb. That's what it is. The words hung in the cold mountain air. Jack had heard worse, far worse. People always laughed before they understood something. That never changed. Eventually, Travis shrugged. Suit yourself. He turned and started back down the trail. Halfway there, he stopped. Just don't expect anybody to come digging you out when the snow buries that ridge. Then he disappeared. The engine noise faded. Silence returned. Jack looked at Diesel. The dog stared toward the cave entrance. Not at Travis, not at the road, at the cave. Like nothing else mattered. Jack followed the dog's gaze. The steady temperature, the dry floor, the protected location, the thick limestone, the stable air. For the first time, the idea stopped sounding desperate and started sounding possible. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. He closed the notebook, rose to his feet, then looked into the darkness beyond the entrance. All right, partner. Diesel immediately stood. Jack adjusted his jacket and started toward the cave. If we're doing this, we'd better get started before winter gets here. The German shepherd walked beside him, and together they disappeared into the mountain. For the next 3 weeks, Jack Mercer treated the cave the same way he once approached an unfamiliar operating area overseas. Slow. Methodical. Nothing assumed. Everything checked twice. Every morning began before sunrise. The mountains were still dark when he stepped out of the truck with a flashlight and a notebook. Frost glittered across the clearing. His breath drifted through the cold air like smoke. Diesel was always awake first, always watching. The dog would make a slow circle around the ridge before returning to the cave entrance, as if conducting his own patrol. Jack eventually stopped questioning it. The dog noticed things people missed. That had already become obvious. Inside the cave, progress came one load at a time. Scrap lumber from abandoned sheds, plywood bought cheap from a demolition site, insulation salvaged from old construction projects. Every dollar mattered. Every board mattered. Jack built a storage rack first, then a workbench. Then he began framing the shelter itself, not against the cave walls, inside them. A room within the mountain. He marked measurements in his notebook. Wind direction, humidity, daily temperature changes, possible escape routes, old habits. Combat engineers learned early that survival depended on preparation, not luck. One afternoon, while carrying a stack of boards toward the cave, Jack noticed Diesel standing motionless near the entrance. The dog wasn't looking at him. He was staring upward. Jack followed his gaze. Nothing. At least, nothing obvious. Then Diesel growled softly. Not aggressive. Warning. The kind of sound that immediately captured attention. Jack stopped. A second later, a fist-sized chunk of limestone broke loose from the ceiling above the entrance. It crashed onto the exact path he had been walking. The rock shattered. Dust exploded across the ground. Jack froze. A few more steps, and it would have hit his shoulder, or his head. Diesel immediately relaxed. Warning delivered. Threat gone. Jack looked at the broken stone, then at the dog. Good catch. Diesel simply blinked, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. The shelter slowly began taking shape. A raised wooden floor, double-framed walls, an air gap for insulation, a small vestibule near the entrance. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just practical. One evening, after hours of work, Jack sat on an overturned bucket near the cave entrance and studied the valley below. The setting sun painted the mountains gold. For a moment, everything looked peaceful. Then a truck appeared on the dirt road. Travis Boone again. The lumberyard owner climbed out and walked toward the cave carrying 2 cups of coffee. Jack narrowed his eyes. That alone felt suspicious. Travis stopped a few feet away. I brought coffee. Jack stared. Why? Figured I'd come see the world's first underground retirement community. Jack accepted the cup. Travis smirked. Good to know. But now I'm curious. They sat in silence for a moment. Wind moved through the trees. Far below, a hawk drifted above the valley. Finally, Travis pointed toward the shelter frame. You really planning to stay here all winter? That's the plan. You know what happens when these mountains get serious? Jack nodded. I do. Travis looked toward the cave. For the first time, he seemed less amused, more concerned. Hope you're right. Then he left. The comment lingered long after the truck disappeared. Hope you're right. Jack hoped so too, because winter was coming fast. That night, he worked late. The beam from his lantern danced across the cave walls. Hammer strikes echoed through the chamber. Board after board, nail after nail. The shelter grew stronger, more complete, more real. Near midnight, Diesel suddenly wandered toward the rear section of the cave. The dog stopped near a wall of rough limestone, sniffed, then sniffed again. Jack watched. Diesel wasn't interested in rabbits or raccoons. His behavior was different, focused, intentional. The dog began pacing a small section of stone, back and forth, back and forth. Jack grabbed his flashlight and walked over. What'd you find? The beam revealed something unusual, almost hidden beneath decades of dust. Scratches, straight scratches, not natural, not random, tool marks. Jack crouched, ran his fingers across the stone. Someone had worked here, a long time ago. The marks were faint, weathered, but unmistakably human. Diesel sat beside him, waiting, watching. Jack shined the light farther along the wall. More marks appeared, then something else. A rusted metal hook embedded deep into the limestone. Old, very old. His pulse quickened slightly. The cave wasn't as forgotten as everyone believed. Someone had used this place before. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Outside, the wind rose across the ridge. The first true warning of winter echoed through the mountains. Jack stared at the strange marks in the stone. Then, at the rusted hook. 100 questions formed instantly. And for the first time since finding the cave, he realized there might be a story buried inside this mountain. A story neither he nor Diesel understood yet. But both of them were about to find it. The wind arrived before the storm. Not snow, not yet. Just the cold breath of November sliding through the Cumberland Mountains. By the following week, Jack had nearly finished the main frame of the shelter. The raised floor was in place. The inner walls stood chest high. Stacks of salvaged insulation waited in neat piles near the entrance. Every tool had a place. Every board had a purpose. The cave no longer felt abandoned. It felt occupied, alive. That morning, Jack worked near the rear chamber where Diesel had discovered the strange tool marks. A heavy steel pry bar rested against the wall. The old rusted hook remained embedded in the limestone. Jack still hadn't figured out its purpose. Every now and then he caught himself staring at it, wondering who had stood here decades earlier, wondering why. He raised his hammer and drove another nail. The sharp metallic crack exploded through the cave. The sound bounced off the stone walls. Once, twice, 3 times. Jack froze. The hammer slipped from his hand. Suddenly, he wasn't looking at limestone anymore. He was looking at dust, heat, broken concrete, a road outside Fallujah, the smell of diesel fuel, the ringing in his ears, a radio screaming, "Contact front! Contact front! Contact!" His heart slammed against his ribs. The cave disappeared. For one terrifying moment, he was back inside an armored convoy, back inside the blast zone, back in the worst day of his deployment. A flash, a shockwave, a young soldier named Ramirez yelling for help. Then silence. The memory hit like a freight train. Jack's breathing shortened, his shoulders tightened. His eyes scanned automatically, for cover that wasn't there. The old reflexes returned, before reason could catch them. Then, something warm pressed against his leg. Diesel. The German shepherd stepped directly in front of him. Not excited. Not nervous. Steady. The dog blocked his view of the cave wall and simply stood there, present, real. Jack focused on the dog's eyes. Amber. Calm. Here. Not Iraq. Not 20 years ago. Here. Slowly, the panic loosened its grip. The cave returned. The stone walls. The lantern. The unfinished shelter. Jack exhaled. Long and slow. Good timing, partner. Diesel remained exactly where he was, guarding the moment. Only after Jack's breathing settled did the dog step aside. Outside, clouds rolled across the mountains. Dark ones. Winter clouds. Jack worked until dusk. By evening, the shelter finally looked like something a man could survive inside. The sight should have felt satisfying. Instead, exhaustion settled into his bones. That night, he slept on a cot inside the unfinished structure for the first time. The temperature inside the cave stayed surprisingly stable, much warmer than outside. Diesel curled up beside the entrance, as always, watching. Sometime after midnight, Jack woke suddenly. No sound, no nightmare. Just instinct. Years of military service had taught him to trust those moments. He sat up, listened. Nothing. Then he heard it. A faint scratching sound. Somewhere deeper in the cave. Diesel was already awake. The dog's ears pointed toward the darkness. Jack grabbed a flashlight. The beam cut through the chamber. The scratching stopped immediately. Silence. After several seconds, he stood and moved forward. Slowly, methodically. The way he would have cleared a building overseas. One step. Pause. Observe. Another step. The beam swept across the rear wall. Nothing. Then something caught the light. A small section of stone near the old hook looked different, cleaner, as though dust had recently fallen away. Jack stepped closer. His fingers brushed the surface. A shallow carving emerged beneath decades of grime, not natural, not random. Letters. Very old letters. Barely visible. He rubbed away more dust. The carving was incomplete. Time had damaged most of it. But one word remained readable. Engineer. Jack stared. The word sent a chill through him. Engineer. Not miner. Not hunter. Engineer. Someone with training. Someone who built things. Someone who understood stone. The same kind of work Jack had spent much of his life doing. Diesel stood beside him, watching, waiting. Jack ran his hand across the faded carving. Outside, the wind howled across the ridge. The first weather alert of the season crackled through the radio sitting back at camp. Forecasters were already warning of an unusually severe winter, possibly the coldest in decades. Jack looked at the unfinished shelter, then at the mysterious carving, then at Diesel. Whatever story was hidden inside this mountain, it wasn't finished with them yet, and neither was winter. The first real freeze arrived 3 days before Thanksgiving. It came quietly. No storm, no warning sirens. Just a hard, relentless cold that settled over the Cumberland Mountains and refused to leave. By dawn, every puddle on the ridge had turned to glass. The grass cracked beneath Jack's boots. The trees stood motionless beneath a pale sky. Winter had finally crossed the line. Inside the cave, however, the air felt different. Not warm, not yet, but steady, predictable. That mattered. Jack stood near the center of the shelter, holding a small thermometer in one hand. 71 degrees. Outside, the temperature hadn't climbed above 30. He glanced toward the masonry stove he had finished only 2 days earlier. A modest fire glowed inside. Nothing dramatic. 3 split logs. That was all. The stones surrounding the stove radiated a gentle heat into the room. The floor felt comfortable beneath his boots. The insulated walls trapped warmth exactly as he had hoped. For the first time since losing his home, Jack allowed himself a small smile. The plan was working. Diesel noticed. The German shepherd thumped his tail once against the floor. Approval granted. Jack laughed quietly. Don't look so surprised. The dog stood and stretched. His scarred shoulder caught the firelight. For a moment, Jack saw not an old retired canine, but the working dog Diesel had once been. Alert, focused, always watching. The radio crackled from a shelf near the stove. A weather report. The announcer's voice carried a tone Jack didn't like. Long-range models continue to indicate one of the coldest winters in decades across eastern Kentucky and southern Appalachia. Jack listened without speaking. The forecasters were growing more confident. Every new report sounded worse than the last. The mountain would be tested. So would everyone living on it. Later that afternoon, he drove into town for supplies. The local hardware store sat between a diner and a feed shop. The parking lot was crowded. People were buying fuel, generators, propane, anything they thought might help. Jack grabbed several boxes of screws, a replacement thermometer, and a few bags of mortar mix. As he stepped outside, a familiar voice stopped him. Still living underground? Travis Boone leaned against a pickup truck with a grin on his face. Several men from the lumber yard stood nearby, coffee cups in hand. watching, waiting. Jack adjusted the supplies beneath his arm. Still asking the same question? A few of the men chuckled. Travis shook his head. You know, most folks buy houses. Jack said nothing. You bought a hole. More laughter. Jack remained calm. Years ago he might have answered. Years ago he might have cared. Now, he simply loaded his supplies into the truck. That seemed to irritate Travis even more. How long you figure before you come crawling back into town? Jack shut the tailgate. Longer than you think. Travis pointed toward the mountains. Christmas. Jack looked at him. What about it? I'll give you until Christmas. The lumberyard owner smirked. First heavy snow, and you'll be back looking for a couch. The men laughed again. Jack climbed into the truck. Before closing the door, he looked at Travis one last time. You should worry more about your own heating bill. Then he drove away. The laughter disappeared behind him, but the comment lingered. By the time he reached the ridge, daylight was fading. The wind had strengthened. Clouds rolled low across the peaks. Diesel jumped from the truck immediately. Instead of heading toward the shelter, he moved around the side of the mountain. Fast. Purposeful. Jack frowned. Diesel. The dog didn't stop. Jack followed. The German shepherd led him nearly 50 yards beyond the cave, before stopping beside a narrow crack hidden behind a cluster of boulders. Cold air poured from it. Steady. Constant. Jack crouched. Interesting. Very interesting. He held one hand near the opening. The airflow wasn't strong, but it existed. A natural vent, possibly connected to another chamber, possibly connected to the cave itself. Diesel pawed at the ground, then looked at Jack, waiting. The same look he'd given before finding the tool marks, before finding the old hook. Jack studied the crack carefully. A slow grin spread across his face. The dog had found another weakness, or another advantage. Either way, it mattered. For the next 2 days, Jack modified the shelter. He adjusted airflow, improved insulation, created a system that trapped more heat while allowing smoke to vent safely. Every adjustment pushed the temperature higher. 72, 74, 76. The mountain outside grew colder. The shelter inside grew warmer, and somewhere beyond the ridge, winter continued gathering strength. On the evening before Thanksgiving, snowflakes finally appeared. Only a few at first, tiny white specks drifting through the dark. Jack stood outside watching them fall. Diesel beside him. Neither moved, neither spoke. The mountains seemed to hold their breath. Far below, lights flickered in distant homes. Families preparing for winter. Families trusting old methods, old assumptions, old beliefs. Jack glanced back toward the cave, toward the shelter hidden inside the mountain, toward the thermometer hanging near the stove. 78 degrees. And climbing. Behind him, the first snow of the season settled silently across the ridge. Ahead of him, the hardest winter anyone could remember was already on its way. It arrived 3 weeks before Christmas. The forecasts had been bad. Reality was worse. By the second week of December, temperatures plunged below zero. The roads through the Cumberland Mountains disappeared beneath ice. Power lines sagged under freezing rain. School buses stopped running. Even the local weather station sounded nervous. Jack listened to the reports every evening. The announcer kept repeating the same phrase, historic cold, historic cold, historic cold. Inside the cave, the shelter held steady. The thermometer now hovered between 79 and 81 degrees depending on the hour. Outside, the mountain looked dead. The trees carried thick coats of ice. Creeks slowed beneath sheets of frozen glass. The world had become white and gray. One afternoon, Martha Reed climbed the ridge in her aging Jeep. The retired schoolteacher stepped inside the shelter and immediately removed her gloves. Her eyes widened. "My lord," Jack looked up from the stove. "What?" "It's warmer in here than my living room." Diesel approached her calmly. Martha scratched behind his ears. The dog accepted the attention like a retired professional. She studied the stone floor, the insulated walls, the masonry heater, then the thermometer. 80 degrees? Jack nodded. Martha stared for a long moment. "You might actually pull this off." That evening she drove back into town. By morning, half the community had heard about the cave. Most didn't believe it. Travis Boone certainly didn't. According to rumor, he laughed so hard he nearly spilled coffee across the lumberyard counter. Jack didn't care. The mountain would settle the argument soon enough. 3 days later, the storm arrived. Not snow at first. Wind. Pure wind. It screamed across the ridges after sunset. The trees bent and groaned. Branches snapped in the darkness. Power failed across 3 counties before midnight. Jack was asleep when the sound came. Crash. His eyes opened instantly. His body moved before thought. 1 second he was asleep. The next, he was sitting upright on the cot, breathing hard. Scanning. Locating exits. Locating cover. The old military reflex returned with brutal speed. For a split second, he was back in Iraq. Night operation. Incoming mortar. Everyone moving at once. Then reality returned. The cave. The shelter. Kentucky. Not Iraq. The crash had come from outside. Diesel was already standing. The German shepherd wasn't barking. That bothered Jack more than barking would have. The dog stood at the entrance, rigid and silent. Watching. Jack grabbed a flashlight, pulled on his boots, then stepped through the vestibule. The wind hit him like a wall. Snow swirled sideways through the darkness. Visibility was almost nothing. The flashlight beam vanished after 20 feet. Diesel moved ahead. Jack followed, slow, careful. A few yards from the entrance, he found the source of the noise. A massive pine tree, nearly 80 feet tall. It had snapped in half and crashed across the slope. The trunk now blocked the primary path leading away from the cave. Jack stared at it. Had it fallen 30 feet closer, it would have crushed part of the entrance. The realization lingered. The mountain had just tested their shelter, and the shelter had survived. Diesel sniffed the fallen tree, then returned to Jack's side. Snow coated the dog's back. Jack rested a gloved hand on his neck. Let's get inside. The temperature continued falling all night. -10, -15, then lower. By dawn, the weather radio reported something nobody wanted to hear. 20 below zero in several mountain valleys. The coldest readings in decades. Jack looked at the thermometer hanging beside the stove. 82 degrees. He checked it twice. Then a third time. The reading never changed. Outside, people were burning wood as fast as they could split it. Inside the cave, 3 small logs glowed quietly inside the masonry heater. The stone walls radiated steady warmth. No drafts, no frozen pipes, no smoke, just heat, reliable heat. Jack sat beside Diesel and listened to the storm rage beyond the mountain. For the first time, he began to understand something. The cave wasn't merely surviving winter, it was beating it, and before long, the rest of the county was about to find out. The storm tightened its grip during the week before Christmas. Road crews gave up trying to clear several mountain routes. Schools closed. Church services were canceled. Even lifelong residents admitted they couldn't remember temperatures staying this low for this long. Every radio broadcast carried another story. Frozen water lines, collapsed barns, families burning through firewood twice as fast as expected. One morning, Jack drove into town to buy dog food and lamp oil. The trip normally took 30 minutes. That day, it took nearly 2 hours. Ice covered every curve. The truck's tires slipped more than once. By the time he reached town, people looked exhausted. At the gas station, 2 men argued about propane shortages. Outside the hardware store, a woman loaded split firewood into the back of her SUV. Everyone seemed worried. Everyone, except Jack. Not because he was tougher, not because he was smarter, because every evening he returned to a shelter holding steady at more than 80 degrees. The difference was becoming impossible to ignore. That afternoon, Sheriff Nolan Briggs appeared at the ridge. The county sheriff climbed out of his truck wrapped in a heavy coat and thick gloves. Snow crunched beneath his boots. Jack stepped outside to greet him. "Everything all right?" Briggs nodded, just checking on people living alone. The sheriff glanced toward the cave entrance. He hesitated, then added quietly, "Truth is, Martha Reed keeps talking about this place." Jack smiled. "That good or bad?" "Haven't decided." A few minutes later, the sheriff stepped through the shelter's inner doorway, then stopped, completely stopped. The expression on his face was worth remembering. He removed one glove, looked at the thermometer, looked at the stove, then looked back at the thermometer. 81? Jack nodded. The sheriff walked slowly through the room. The insulated walls, the raised floor, the stone surrounding the heater, the steady warmth, no roaring fire, no piles of burning wood, no smoke, just comfort. Finally, Briggs shook his head. "My house is 48 degrees right now." Jack looked up. "You're kidding." "I wish I was. The sheriff laughed softly. My wife made me sleep wearing 2 sweatshirts last night. For the first time since arriving, Jack laughed too. A real laugh, the kind that hadn't visited often in recent years. Briggs spent nearly an hour inside the shelter, asking questions, taking notes, looking at details. When he finally left, he paused near the entrance. You know people aren't going to believe me. They don't have to. Oh, they'll believe me, the sheriff smiled. They just won't like it. The truck disappeared down the ridge. By evening, the rumors began spreading. Fast. Faster than Jack expected. The sheriff told the county road supervisor. The road supervisor told the feed store owner. The feed store owner told everyone else. Within 2 days, people were talking about little else. A cave. A retired veteran. 80 degrees. 3 logs a day. The story sounded ridiculous. The feed story sounded ridiculous, which only made it spread faster. On Saturday morning, the first visitors arrived. Then more. Then more. Most stood near the entrance staring. Some stepped inside. Others simply shook their heads. The reactions were remarkably similar. Silence, followed by disbelief, followed by questions. How thick are the walls? How much wood are you burning? How long does the heat last? Jack answered every one. No secrets, no bragging, just facts. By Sunday, even Travis Boone showed up. The lumberyard owner entered with crossed arms and a skeptical expression. 3 minutes later, the expression disappeared. He stared at the thermometer. Then the stove. Then the thermometer again. That thing broken? Jack smiled. No. Travis approached it, touched the glass, as if checking whether it was real. The shelter sat at 82 degrees. Outside, the wind chill hovered near 20 below. The contrast was almost impossible to understand. For the first time since meeting him, Travis didn't have a joke. He didn't have a criticism either. Just confusion. Pure confusion. Jack found that strangely satisfying. Not because Travis was wrong, because reality had finally spoken louder than opinions. That night, the shelter remained full of warmth. Outside, the county continued battling the cold. Inside, Diesel slept near the stove while snow tapped softly against the mountain. The German shepherd suddenly lifted his head. One ear turned toward the radio. Jack noticed. A second later, the emergency weather alert interrupted the broadcast. The announcer's voice sounded tense, very tense. A child was missing, 8 years old, last seen near the edge of town. Search crews were already looking, but visibility remained poor. Temperatures were falling again. Jack slowly looked toward Diesel. The dog was already standing, listening. The shelter fell silent. Outside, the storm continued to howl across the mountains, and somewhere in that darkness, a family was waiting for a miracle. Jack didn't sleep that night. Neither did Diesel. The emergency broadcast repeated every 30 minutes. An 8-year-old boy named Caleb Turner had disappeared sometime before sunset. His family lived near the northern edge of town. Search teams had already spent hours combing roads, fields, and nearby woods. Nothing. No footprints. No jacket. No sign. The temperature continued falling. Every passing hour made the situation worse. By dawn, the storm had eased slightly. Not enough, but enough to move. Jack poured coffee into a metal mug and listened to the latest update on the radio. Still missing. Still no leads. He looked across the shelter. Diesel was already standing by the door, waiting. The dog had been restless since the first announcement, pacing, listening, watching. Something about it felt familiar. The same behavior he'd shown before finding the cave's hidden vent, before discovering the tool marks, before warning Jack about the falling stone. Jack clipped on Diesel's lead. The German shepherd immediately pulled toward the entrance. Easy. The dog ignored him. That alone caught Jack's attention. Diesel rarely ignored commands. 20 minutes later, they reached the town's volunteer fire station. Pickup trucks and emergency vehicles filled the parking lot. Concern hung over the crowd like another layer of cold. Parents stood together, speaking in hushed voices. Search volunteers gathered maps around folding tables. Sheriff Briggs looked exhausted. The moment he spotted Jack, he walked over. "You here to help?" Jack nodded. "If you'll have us." Briggs glanced at Diesel. "At this point, I'll take every advantage I can get." The sheriff knelt briefly. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, studying him. Then Briggs stood. "We lost the trail sometime after midnight." "After." Jack listened carefully. "Old habits. Gather information first. Move second." The sheriff pointed to a map. Last confirmed sighting was here, a narrow area near the tree line. Beyond it stretched several miles of forest and steep ravines, not good terrain, especially in winter. The search began shortly afterward. Volunteers spread out across the woods. Voices called Caleb's name. Snow crunched beneath boots. The mountain swallowed the sound. Hours passed. Nothing. By noon, frustration had started replacing hope. Several teams returned empty-handed. One volunteer believed he had found tracks. They belonged to a deer. Another reported movement near a creek, a fallen branch. The storm had erased nearly everything. Jack remained quiet, watching, observing. Diesel remained unusually focused. His nose never stopped working. Back and forth, across the snow, across the wind. Searching. Then it happened. The dog stopped, completely. His body stiffened, ears forward, nose raised. Jack recognized the posture instantly. Target acquisition. Diesel turned sharply and pulled away from the main search area. Hard. The lead tightened. Diesel. The dog kept moving. Jack looked toward the sheriff. Briggs saw it too. "What is it?" Jack shook his head. "I don't know." Then he followed. The German Shepherd moved downhill through a section of forest. Nobody had searched yet. The terrain became rough, steep, dangerous. Snow hid rocks and fallen timber beneath the surface. Several times Jack nearly lost his footing. Diesel never slowed. Something was driving him forward. A scent, a clue, a possibility. The dog crossed a frozen creek bed and climbed a small ridge, then suddenly stopped. Silence. For a moment nothing happened. Then Jack heard it. A faint sound. So faint he almost missed it. A cry. Weak. Distant. Human. His pulse jumped. "Caleb." No response. Then another faint cry. Ahead. Somewhere below. Jack moved faster. Diesel surged forward. The ridge ended abruptly at a narrow ravine hidden beneath drifting snow. And there he was. A small figure wedged between rocks near the bottom. Alive. Barely. Caleb Turner looked up through frozen tears. The relief hit Jack immediately. Then everything happened at once. Diesel lunged down the slope before anyone could stop him. Snow gave way beneath the dog's weight. He slid nearly 20 feet. Sharp rocks protruded from the ice. One caught his rear leg. A painful yelp echoed through the ravine. Jack's heart stopped, but Diesel kept going. The German Shepherd reached the boy first, pressed against him, providing warmth, refusing to move, even after the injury, even after the fall. Jack climbed down moments later, carefully, quickly. Caleb's lips were blue. His hands shook violently, but he was alive. Alive. Above them, search volunteers began shouting. The news spread, almost instantly. Unquote. Unquote. They found him. They found him. Jack wrapped the boy in emergency blankets. Diesel stayed beside him the entire time. Blood stained the snow near the dog's injured leg. Yet every attempt to pull him away failed. The German Shepherd remained beside Caleb, guarding him, protecting him, as if the mission wasn't over yet. And for the first time that day, grown men standing in the snow found themselves unable to speak, because every one of them understood what they had just witnessed. A wounded old dog had refused to leave a freezing child behind. The rescue changed everything. By the time Jack and Diesel returned to town, word had already spread through the county. People came out of houses and businesses despite the cold. They stood near the fire station, near the sheriff's office, near the ambulance carrying Caleb Turner. Some waved, some simply nodded. Many looked directly at Diesel. The German Shepherd limped slightly as he walked. Blood had dried in the fur near his rear leg, yet his eyes remained fixed on the ambulance until it disappeared around the corner. Only then did he relax. Sheriff Briggs approached them. His face looked different, less official, more personal. He knelt beside Diesel and carefully scratched behind the dog's ears. "You saved that kid!" Diesel leaned slightly into the touch, then looked toward Jack. The sheriff followed his gaze. "You too." Jack shook his head. "The dog found him." Briggs smiled. "Maybe." But both men knew the truth. Neither would have succeeded without the other. That evening, a veterinarian cleaned Diesel's wound. Fortunately, the injury wasn't serious. Painful, but not life-threatening. Several stitches, A few weeks of healing. The dog endured the treatment without complaint. The veterinarian eventually laughed. Most patients fight harder than this. Jack glanced at Diesel. He's had worse days. The drive back to the ridge felt strangely quiet. The storm still covered the mountains. The roads remained dangerous. Yet something had changed. For months, Jack had felt invisible. A man people pitied, ignored, or quietly dismissed. Now strangers waved when he passed, not because of him, because of the dog riding beside him. Diesel seemed completely uninterested in the attention. As always, the next morning, another surprise arrived. Then another, then several more. Vehicles climbed the ridge all day. Neighbors, volunteers, families, people carrying food, coffee, medical supplies, firewood. No one had coordinated it. No one had organized it. It simply happened. Martha Reed arrived with homemade soup. The Turners brought enough groceries to fill an entire shelf. A retired mechanic delivered a stack of seasoned oak logs. Even Travis Boone appeared. That surprised Jack more than anyone else. The lumberyard owner climbed from his truck carrying several bundles of insulation. For a moment, neither man spoke. The cold wind moved through the trees. Finally, Travis cleared his throat. Heard the dog could use some extra warmth. Jack stared. Travis looked uncomfortable, almost embarrassed. "You don't have to say anything." He set the insulation near the entrance, then quickly added, "Kid's alive because of him." For several seconds, neither man moved. Then Jack nodded. "Thanks." Travis nodded once, nothing more, but it was enough. By late afternoon, the shelter had become something unexpected. A gathering place. Not crowded, not noisy. Just people escaping the cold for a little while. The cave that had once been called a grave now held laughter, conversations, warm coffee, the sound of boots drying near the stove. Jack watched it all from a chair near the heater, sometimes speaking, mostly listening. The warmth inside remained astonishing. 81 degrees. Steady. Outside, temperatures remained brutally cold. Families burned through wood at alarming rates. Yet inside the mountain, the stone walls held their heat like a living thing. That evening, Diesel finally seemed tired. Truly tired. The dog curled beside the stove and fell asleep almost immediately. His stitched leg twitched occasionally. Dreaming. Probably running. Probably working. Jack smiled. Then noticed something unusual. For the first time in weeks, his own shoulders felt lighter. The constant tension that usually followed him seemed quieter, more distant. That night he lay down on his cot. The fire glowed softly. The shelter remained warm. The storm whispered beyond the mountain. Jack closed his eyes. Normally sleep arrived in fragments. An hour here, 30 minutes there, interrupted by memories, sounds, reflexes. The war never fully left. Not even after all these years. But that night, something different happened. He slept. Not perfectly. Not forever. Just deeply. 5 uninterrupted hours. The longest stretch he could remember in years. When he finally woke before dawn, confusion came first. Then, realization. No nightmare. No flashback. No sudden panic. Only silence. Diesel remained asleep near the stove. The shelter remained warm. The mountain remained still. Jack sat quietly for several minutes, listening. The peace felt unfamiliar, almost fragile, like something that might vanish if he moved too quickly. Then Diesel's ears twitched. The dog opened one eye, slowly stood, and began walking toward the rear chamber of the cave. Jack frowned. The German shepherd rarely ignored breakfast. Today he did. Diesel continued deeper into the darkness, past the shelter, past the old hook, toward the hidden section of limestone near the rear wall. Then he disappeared from view. Jack waited. 1 minute, 2, 3. No return. A strange feeling settled in his chest. He grabbed his flashlight, then followed, because after everything that had happened, he had learned one important lesson. When Diesel thought something mattered, it usually did. And somewhere beyond the shelter, deep inside the mountain, the wounded old dog was about to uncover another secret. The beam from Jack's flashlight swept across the rear chamber. The cave felt different back here. Quieter. Older. The sounds from the shelter faded into the darkness behind him. Only the soft scrape of Diesel's paws echoed through the stone passage. The German shepherd had stopped near the same section of limestone where the old hook and faded carvings had been found weeks earlier. Despite the stitches in his leg, Diesel was digging. Slowly, stubbornly, one paw at a time. Snow, cold, injury, none of it seemed to matter. Jack crouched beside him. "What is it, partner?" Diesel kept working. Bits of dirt and loose rock scattered across the floor. For several minutes, Jack simply watched. Then his flashlight caught something unusual. A narrow gap, barely visible, hidden beneath decades of packed soil. Jack's pulse quickened. He grabbed a small shovel from the shelter and returned. Together, man and dog worked the opening wider. An hour passed, then another. The gap slowly revealed itself. Cold air drifted through from somewhere beyond. Not the sharp cold of winter, something steadier, more constant. Jack pushed away another layer of loose stone. Suddenly, the ground beneath him shifted. A section of earth collapsed inward, not dramatically, just enough to reveal darkness beyond. Jack froze, then aimed the flashlight through the opening. The beam disappeared into a much larger chamber. His breath caught. The cave didn't end here. It continued, far deeper into the mountain. Carefully, Jack widened the opening enough to squeeze through. Diesel immediately followed. The hidden chamber stretched beyond the flashlight's reach. The ceiling rose higher. The floor leveled out. The air felt noticeably different, warmer, stable, almost unchanged by the brutal winter outside. Jack moved slowly, observing. Years of engineering work had taught him to notice details. The stone walls here were different, denser, smoother, and near the far side of the chamber, he found the reason. Water. A narrow underground stream flowed quietly through the rock. Not frozen, not even close. The temperature remained remarkably consistent. Jack knelt beside it. His hand touched the water. Cold, but not winter cold. Ground temperature cold. Steady, reliable. The realization hit him immediately. The stream, the limestone, the thermal mass, the hidden airflow. Everything worked together. The mountain itself was helping regulate temperature. The shelter wasn't successful because of one idea. It was successful because several natural systems were working together. For a long moment, Jack simply sat there, listening to the water, listening to the mountain. Then Diesel barked once. A short sound, not alarm, attention. Jack turned. The dog stood near the rear wall of the hidden chamber. Something metallic reflected the flashlight beam. Jack walked over. Half buried beneath dirt and stone, sat a rusted metal box. Old military surplus. The kind used decades ago to protect documents. His heart began beating faster. Carefully, he pulled it free. The hinges protested as he opened the lid. Inside lay several water-damaged papers. Most had deteriorated beyond recognition. But one envelope remained surprisingly intact. Dust covered the front. Jack brushed it away. Then froze. Written across the envelope in faded ink were two words. Jack Mercer. He stared at it. The handwriting was instantly familiar. Uncle Raymond. For several seconds, he couldn't move. The cave suddenly felt very small, very quiet, very personal. His uncle had died years earlier, yet somehow, his presence remained here. Jack slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter. The paper crackled with age. He unfolded it carefully. The first line hit him harder than he expected. "If you're reading this, it means Diesel found what I hoped someone eventually would." Jack laughed softly despite himself. Only his uncle would begin a letter that way. As he continued reading, pieces of a forgotten story emerged. Raymond Mercer had served as a military engineer during his younger years. After returning home, he became fascinated with natural shelter systems, thermal storage, and mountain geology. Over decades, he explored the cave, mapped the hidden chambers, and studied how the mountain retained heat. The notes described airflow, water movement, stone density, everything Jack had slowly discovered himself. Then came the final paragraph. Jack read it twice, then a third time. "If life ever backs you into a corner, remember this mountain. Stone remembers what people forget. It holds warmth long after the fire dies." Jack lowered the letter. The first four, 2-3, 2-3, 2-3, 2-3, 2-3. For a long time, he said nothing. Diesel sat beside him. The old dog leaned lightly against his leg. Outside, winter still ruled the mountains. But inside the hidden chamber, surrounded by stone and memory, Jack felt something unexpected. Not victory, not relief, connection. As though someone had reached across years of silence and placed a hand on his shoulder. The mountain hadn't just given him shelter. It had returned a piece of family he thought was gone forever. And somewhere far away, a television report about the rescued boy was already reaching Nashville. Someone else was about to hear Jack Mercer's name for the first time in years. Emily Mercer almost changed the channel. The television played quietly in the background while she folded laundry in her apartment. A local news segment had transitioned into a human interest story about a missing child rescued during a historic winter storm. She wasn't really paying attention. Then she heard a name. Jack Mercer. Emily froze. The shirt slipped from her hands. On the screen appeared a familiar face. Older, more tired, more weathered, but unmistakably her father. The reporter spoke about a veteran living in a cave shelter in the mountains. A veteran whose German shepherd had helped save a lost boy. The camera showed the cave, the shelter, the thermometer, the dog. Emily stared in silence. The last conversation she'd had with her father ended badly, nearly 3 years earlier. Neither of them had called since. Pride could be expensive, so could hurt. She had spent years convincing herself that distance was easier, safer. Yet seeing him now felt different. The reporter wasn't describing a broken man. They were describing someone helping others survive. Someone people respected. Someone she barely recognized anymore. Then the camera showed Diesel, the German shepherd, limping slightly beside Jack. Emily smiled despite herself. She remembered that dog. Years ago, Diesel had stolen an entire Thanksgiving turkey from a kitchen counter and somehow managed to look innocent afterward. The memory surfaced unexpectedly, and with it came others. Better memories. Family memories. Memories she had spent years avoiding. By sunrise the next morning, Emily was driving toward Kentucky. The storm had weakened. Roads were slowly reopening. The trip took nearly 7 hours. Long enough to second-guess herself a dozen times. Long enough to consider turning around twice. But she kept driving. The mountains eventually appeared on the horizon. Snow covered the ridges. Clouds drifted low across the valleys. Everything looked exactly as she remembered, and completely different. Near sunset, she reached the dirt road leading toward the property. The truck tracks in the snow guided her the rest of the way. When she finally parked near the clearing, she sat motionless behind the wheel. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The cave looked impossible, like something from a story. Not real life, not her father, yet warm light glowed from inside, proof that it was real. Emily stepped from the car. Cold air bit her cheeks. Snow crunched beneath her boots. Then movement appeared near the entrance. A familiar German shepherd emerged from the shelter. Older now, slower, a stitched wound visible on one leg, but still, unmistakably, Diesel. The dog stopped. His ears lifted. For a moment, he simply stared. Then recognition arrived. His tail began moving. Once, twice, then faster. Emily laughed through sudden tears she hadn't expected. "Hey, buddy." Diesel crossed the snow toward her, not running. His injured leg wouldn't allow that, but, determined, he reached her and immediately pressed his head against her hand, just as he had done years earlier, as if no time had passed, as if nothing had been broken. Emily knelt in the snow and wrapped her arms around his neck. The dog accepted the embrace without complaint, then looked back toward the cave, almost as though he were saying, "Come on, he's waiting." The shelter door opened. Jack stepped outside. For a moment, neither spoke. The mountain seemed to hold its breath. Snow drifted quietly through the fading light. Jack looked older than she remembered, but somehow stronger, standing straighter, more present. Neither knew what to say first. Years of distance stood between them. Years of missed birthdays, missed phone calls, missed opportunities. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "You really live in a cave?" Jack laughed. A genuine laugh, apparently. She shook her head. "I drove 7 hours to see if that part was actually true." "Fair question." The tension eased slightly. Not gone, but softer. Inside, the shelter glowed with warmth. Emily stepped through the entrance and immediately stopped. The heat surprised her. The comfort surprised her even more. It felt less like a cave than many houses she'd visited. The stone floor radiated warmth. The stove glowed quietly. The walls felt solid, safe, thoughtful. She looked around, then looked at her father. "You built all this?" Jack nodded. "Mostly. And Diesel." The dog thumped his tail. Emily smiled. Hours later, they sat beside the stove, coffee steaming from their mugs. The conversation moved slowly. Neither rushed it. Some wounds required patience. Outside, winter continued raging across the mountains. Inside, the shelter remained calm. Eventually, Emily asked the question she hadn't planned to ask, the one that had followed her all the way from Nashville. "Dad." Jack looked up. "Yeah?" She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "How long have you been carrying all this alone?" "Ed." The fire crackled softly. Diesel lifted his head. Jack stared into the flames for several seconds. Long enough for old memories to surface. Long enough for old walls to weaken. When he finally answered, his voice was almost a whisper. "Longer than I should have." Silence settled over the room. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Then Jack looked toward his daughter. For the first time in his life, he spoke openly about something he had hidden from nearly everyone. About the years after Iraq. About the nights he couldn't sleep. About the memories that followed him home. And about the dark period after Sarah died, when he wasn't sure he wanted to keep moving forward. Emily listened without interruption, without judgment. The confession didn't break the room. It healed it. And beside the stove, Diesel quietly rested his head across Jack's boot, just as he always had, just as he always would. And maybe that's what this story was really about. Not the cave, not the winter, not even the mountain. Maybe it was about what happens when someone refuses to give up on you, even when you've almost given up on yourself. If Diesel's loyalty touched your heart, leave a simple 1 in the comments. And if you've ever had a dog, a friend, or someone who stood by you during the hardest season of your life, leave a 0 so we can honor them together. I read as many comments as I can, and I'd love to hear your story. And if you enjoy real stories about veterans, loyal dogs, survival, second chances, and the incredible bond between people and animals, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. There are many more unforgettable journeys waiting just ahead. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of those who stand beside you, and never underestimate the difference one loyal companion can make. We'll see you in the next story.